You got to remember that statistic and what that means for this room. We have less than 20 students in this class. 4 students are Black, and only 1 out of every 10 poor kids is going to graduate from a bachelor's program. I've gone past that.
Right.
So the odds, the mathematical odds that I can be in this room and also those other 3 Black students can all also be from poverty are astronomically low.
It's close to 0.
It's functionally 0.
Right.
You might as well treat it as 0.
Mm.
Here's where things got interesting for me. So I had this experience. I knew poverty very well. What I didn't know yet is how thin other people's understanding of poverty was.
Mm.
I'm 33. I was coming out of, my pop culture experience, all of the 90s, and prior to that, were full of sitcoms, both Black and white, that showed not just different classes, but class hostility. So you're seeing Martin, you're seeing The Cosby Show, you're seeing Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And again, on the white side as well, you're seeing The Simpsons, you're seeing Roseanne, you're seeing Married with Children,
Right.
class. It's all over the place. That started to dwindle away after Obama's presidency for Black Americans, at least. So I'm in this graduate school class. It's 2014. The second wave of Ferguson is happening. And I'm in an education theory program. So we're literally studying statistics like the one I just mentioned. And even as we're saying these statistics out loud, and even though all of this race stuff is happening specifically in these poor communities, and that's where we're seeing the protests, and that's where we're seeing the death and the bloodshed and the violence, when those other 3 Black students in the class go through the statistics of oppression, so at this time, mass incarceration is also commanding a lot of attention. So when they're talking about mass incarceration, when they're talking about over-policing, school-to-prison pipeline, when they're talking about extrajudicial killings, all the things that activists really have to center, which are statistics that have either to do with death or the denigration of bodies. That's really what moves the discussion. Every activist group leads with those statistics. As those other 3 Black students are referencing these, they're using first-person pronouns.
Right. Yeah.
They're saying I, me, why, or my, our people, all of these things. And their audience, these other 8 students, if it's a 12-student class, is, middle to upper class white students, most of whom are liberal by virtue of being in an education program, or at least if they haven't picked a political affiliation yet, very moved by humanist value.
Mm.
And they want to be on the right side of the oppressed. They want to be on the right side of history. And they have these Black students who are leveraging these statistics in this way. They say the statistic and then they say their own opinion or argument on behalf of the people representing those statistics.
Mm.
They don't belong in terms of class to the people, to those communities. Make that very clear. Ta-Nehisi Coates had a very famous piece in The Atlantic called "The Black Family in the Age of Mass Incarceration."
Mm.
At one point, he mentions the statistic: 8 out of every 10 Black prisoners in the country essentially was in poverty prior to being incarcerated.
Right.
So Black America has 3 classes: poor, middle, upper.
Mm.
This issue that is widely considered a Black problem, something kind of floating in the air that can randomly attack any Black person, which is incarceration. When you broke it down by class, as Ta-Nehisi Coates did, he found that 8 out of every 10 Black prisoners was coming from just one class of Black people,
Right.
the impoverished.
Yeah.
Those families of 4 that earn less than $27,000 or $26,000 a year. The other 2 classes of Black Americans, middle and upper, who are the combined majority of Black America, at this time around 18, or speaking right now, around 19% of Black America is living in poverty as previously defined. The majority of Black America only contributes to that, total 10 Black prisoners, 20%. But just a few paragraphs down, after highlighting how one class of Black people is producing all of the bodies, all of the suffering that activists are going to leverage to fight against incarceration, he switches to talking about Black people broadly and talking about how prison is affecting Black communities. He's talking about his own self as a Black person. And again, there's that first person pronouns. And me being the child of somebody who was in prison by the time I was 3 months old, and knowing many other people were imprisoned, many people who just were in holding for a while, waiting for event, in county and whatnot. All of this is obvious to me, the same way it's obvious to me that mathematically speaking, from the statistics we're learning, those other 3 Black students can't also be from poverty. And also just from me being from that subculture of the Black American ethnicity, I know most of the time just looking and experiencing other Black people, whether or not they come from that class. So it was just obvious to me that I'm watching Black students be able to leverage the suffering of one class of Black people that I belong to make their own arguments about what to do regarding race problems to a white audience that is mostly nodding along. And one of the things that I got to experience that I guess maybe sent me wanting to write this a little bit, although I didn't write it right then, was that when I disagreed with those other Black students, I would do something that people get to see in the article, which is that I wouldn't just throw out the statistics. I would throw out my actual memories of contributing to the statistic.
Right. Yeah.
And once I made it concrete, once I said, I lived in a crack den and here's my opinion, and it differs from these other Black students, those Black students, and I don't fault them for this because they were quite young, we all were, they weren't prepared to have to argue their case against somebody who could make a better authenticity argument, which I could.
Yeah.
And the white students weren't prepared to sift through 2 competing Black opinions. And so the room would just fall silent.
You got to feel